prices up in April.
Astronomical 46.9%.
Inflation at a new 4-decade high.
You robbers!
In its simplest terms, inflation probably isn't as complicated as you think. It just means that the price of goods and services increases gradually over time. The problem is, as the price of goods and services goes up, the value of your money decreases. But you might be thinking, what is inflation? And why does it mean that prices are going up? Although the definition itself is quite simple, inflation is a tricky subject, and there are lots of different terms to understand. I think I need some help explaining everything. So I've reached out to David Wessel.
Is the light okay? Because I can get another light.
And Robert Hockett.
Excellent.
I'm David Wessel. I'm director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Between the years 2003 and 2023, the dollar bought 40% less stuff. If you think about ears of corn, say that in 2003, a dollar bought 1 ear of corn. In 2023, a dollar bought only 2/3 of an ear of corn. And that's what's happened to the purchasing power of the dollar. When prices go up, the amount of stuff you can buy for each dollar goes down.
But because inflation occurs across entire economies, it has the potential to impact the cost of pretty much everything. Fuel, clothes, food, housing, you name it.
It's sometimes hard for people to understand that just because the price of gasoline goes up, that's not inflation. When we talk about inflation, we mean a generalized increase in prices.
And because inflation affects so much, it's important that we know exactly how much the rate is changing.
Well, the government actually does surveys, and it finds out what does a typical household buy. No household is really typical. Eggs, milk, rent, health insurance, subway fares, college tuition, and they assemble a basket that represents what American households buy, and then they measure the price of that every month to see whether it went up or down.
Okay, let's just say that the total price of this month's basket is $102, but last month was $100. That's a rise of 2% in the basket's overall cost. However, while the cost of the basket is measured month to month, inflation is normally described in terms of an annual change. So when you hear on the news that inflation is at 10%, that means that the prices have risen by that over the previous 12 months. Now, you might think that the goal is to have an inflation rate of 0 or even -%, but that's not the case. The ideal rate is actually 2% a year. But why is that?
Well, Alan Greenspan, who was for almost 20 years the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, once defined this as so little inflation that nobody talks about it. That is, you don't have to worry if you sign a lease or car loan or negotiate a union contract or set prices on your goods and services, that somehow you're going to discover that your prices aren't going up fast enough to cover your costs or your wages aren't going up fast enough.
So, the lower rate of inflation is ideal because it means that the prices aren't going up rapidly, but the economy is still growing.
The economy works better with a little bit of inflation because it allows prices to fluctuate more than they would otherwise. And having fluctuating prices is a good thing in a market economy because it helps us balance the demand for goods and services with the supply. So when you see on TV or on social media a report that inflation has gone from, say, 6% a year to 4% a year, all that means is that prices are rising more slowly. It doesn't mean that prices are falling. Falling prices would be negative inflation, -4%, and we don't see that very often for the whole basket of goods and services.
Now that makes sense, but I'm wondering, has inflation always been around or is it a new phenomenon? We're here at the Library of Mistakes, a library dedicated to the study of financial history, which seems like the best place to find out. Turns out inflation has been causing problems for a long time. In fact, inflation might have contributed to the fall of one of the ancient world's most powerful civilizations, the Roman Empire. During its long reign, Rome conquered much of Europe and got a significant amount of silver from mines across the continent. Then they used this silver to produce the denarius, a brand new currency. The denarius was made of only coins rather than paper money and coins like we have today. And the value of these coins was based in the silver used to produce them. And this monetary system worked fine until they ran out of silver. Without silver, Roman officials couldn't produce enough coins to cover their vast expenses. So as a workaround, they reduced the amount of silver in the denarius coin and replaced it with cheaper metals. And then they did this again, and again, and again, until the amount of silver in the coin had decreased from 95% to just 0.5%. This caused a problem. By adding more money into the economy, Roman businesses and people were able to spend more. Now, having more money to spend might not sound like a problem, but if demand for goods or services surpasses the available supply, the prices of those goods and services increase. The Roman people became angry at the price increases, leading to riots, mutinies, and a generally unstable society. And though inflation wasn't the only reason behind the fall of Rome, it certainly didn't help. It doesn't seem as though we've learnt much from the ancient Romans, because in 2022, the inflation rates in the US hit record-breaking highs.
One question is, why do we end up with more inflation than we want? What is the condition of the economy that leads to that outcome? And the simple answer is, there's more demand in the economy than the available supply. That is, people want to buy more goods and services than the economy can produce or that we can import for other countries.
I find it's generally more helpful to think of inflation, when we're sort of categorizing it, as being either primarily supply-driven or primarily demand-driven.
Demand-driven inflation occurs when people have more money to spend, and supply-driven inflation occurs if the supply of products or services suddenly decreases.
Maybe March and April of 2022. There were spikes, of course, in the prices of grains and of fuels because of the sudden outbreak of war in Central and Eastern Europe. And because Ukraine, in turn, was one of the world's largest suppliers of grain, of wheat that goes into so many foodstuffs, their prices rose very rapidly, right, very quickly.
Now, you might be wondering, what can be done to bring the rate of inflation down?
There are a couple things. One thing is you can reduce the demand in the economy. How do you do that? Well, you can reduce the demand in the economy by raising taxes, that is, taking money from people so they can't spend it. That doesn't seem to be very popular with governments. Or you can use interest rates.
In the US, the Federal Reserve manages interest rates and uses them as a tool to control inflation. When interest rates are higher, it costs more to borrow money, usually from the bank. Essentially, the interest rate is kind of like a rental charge.
When borrowing's more expensive, people spend less. When people spend less, demand in the economy goes down.
Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the inflation rate in the US hit a 40-year high, and the Federal Reserve did just this to try and bring it down. But raising interest rates comes with risk.
Some people may lose their jobs. When there's less demand, that means there's less work to be done. But what they're trying to do is reduce the demand in the economy so it can meet the available supply.
And indeed, oftentimes central banks have engineered recessions or even depressions by raising rates like this as a means of, handling or eliminating inflation.
An alternative, harder, is to increase the supply in the economy. Now, generally, that's hard to do quickly, but for instance, sometimes the government has a stockpile, like the US has a stockpile of oil. When prices go up, they sell that oil. That's a way to increase the supply in the economy.
It seems like none of the options is perfect. Problem is, doing nothing about increasing rates of inflation can have catastrophic consequences. In 2008, inflation rates got so high in Zimbabwe that the government had to start printing $100 trillion notes to match the cost of goods and services. eventually they had to ditch their currency entirely. And as of August 2022, inflation in Zimbabwe was still at a rate of 285%. The fact is, high rates of inflation are extremely difficult to manage, and over the last few years, inflation has been high across the world. Unfortunately, there's no saying when inflation rates will stabilise, but measures taken in the US are working, and over the past 12 months, the rates of inflation have been steadily falling. But what can we actually do with this information?
When prices are pretty stable and they're not going up very much, it doesn't really matter if you shop around. But when prices are going up as they have been 4 or 5% a year, it's more important to be a careful shopper to make sure that you're not getting ripped off because you happen to pick the store that's rising prices faster than everybody else. It's really important to mentally adjust for rising prices. So let's say you get a summer job and you put some money in the bank. And the bank is paying you on a savings account something like 0.5% interest. Well, if we have 4% inflation and you're getting 0.5% interest on your savings account, the purchasing power of your savings is going down every minute. And so that's why you want to look around for something, say a money market fund or a bank that's paying more, because you want to make sure that your savings are at least growing at the rate of inflation. So the purchasing power of the money you save from your summer job is worthwhile.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Scope. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching.
Rolling.